Oh. Hmm. Hmm. Oh. 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 Oh, sorry everyone. I can't stop laughing for some reason. I'm trying to do the introduction. Oh, for some reason I can't stop laughing. Oh, oh boy. Oh, oh, all right. I'm gonna try to say. Oh, all right. I can't say it. All right. Hello everyone. Welcome to Coffee Cup Enlightenment. Oh, what's today's talk gonna be about? Oh boy. Oh. Uh, I don't really feel like any other talk coming up at the moment, so maybe just leave it as a giggle. I might pause it a bit and see if some talk wants to come up. So today's talk is going to be about highlighting who's actually living our life. Is it us, or is it the conditioned self? And pretty much from my experience a few years ago when I had this enlightenment experience for 1.5 days, it does seem apparent from the absence of the conditioned self that disappeared that morning and left dead silence for 1.5 days, and also took with it 10,000 kilograms of weight and returned back to the normal state of weightlessness and effortlessness and untouchableness and the aliveness that I am. All of that left, and that gave evidence to detect and recognize and distinguish who's actually living the life. Is it me, or is it a conditioned self? Over the years, the conditioned self has lessened through various practices of self-inquiry. As mentioned in other videos, spent many years, whenever my conditioned self felt a disturbance, I would say that's what they are meant to be doing. And that sort of just put aside all my conditioned self's judgments put aside further disturbances for the conditioned self, and then help me see what was actually happening in reality was actually neutral, when there wasn't the conditioned self imposing its judgments and its feelings. And as mentioned before in videos, that, and this is pretty much the main gist of this today's video, is that it's not really us that's feeling. There's a conditioned self within us that pretty much started, I've even heard recently, pretty much even starts in the womb. As soon as you become a something, now you're a body inside a womb, you're a something and separate. So the life and the consciousness has already started to create identifications for itself, even though it doesn't know any concepts and language yet. It's still sort of making feelings and pictures for itself as a something other than others. And as this conditioned self just grows and grows, and it's taught conceptual language by adults, it's given a name, it's told who it is, the way it acts, it's told who they are by adults, by parents, and the conditioned self and the consciousness believes in these ideas by its surroundings, and it makes up this conditioned self. And then pretty much, it's almost like you don't even get to experience life yet. What it's like just to be consciousness, to be life itself. Similar to what I experienced a few years ago in the absence for that 1.5 days, where I was just life and nothing else, nothing added upon to it, no identifications anymore. And so you don't get to experience what it's like. So it's just a complete assumption that everything that's within you, that's felt within you, that's spoken within you, that's talking on your behalf is you. And I'm just here to say that that's not true at all. Based on my experience, just from many years of doing self-inquiry over the last 15 years, and seeing reductions, seeing the conditioned self, parts of it crumble away, and in an instant a weight was lifted, and no longer having that repetitive judgment of that conditioned self, participate in my life anymore, participate with certain triggers anymore. I noticed when certain triggers that were in the past so familiarly had a trigger from the conditioned self to it, that they weren't there anymore. So I experienced the same triggers, and but the absence of the conditioned self being affected by that. And really that goes with everyone. The things that make us cry when we're younger, the same things make us laugh. So that's evidence in everyone that there's a process going on within us, that there's a conditioned self. Yes, it's been born, it's growing within us, we're associating with it, we think of it as a given, as our identity, but naturally it happens. Parts of it crumble away just naturally over time, especially like the teenage conditioned self, and you might call it the immature conditioning, the way it cries over the little things, maybe like a 13-year-old not getting its way over some little thing, and then when that person reaches about 20s and that certain trigger of that little crying episode doesn't happen anymore, and we call that maturity. But what I'd like to say, it's not really maturity in the greater extent. It's more so can be most times just a shedding away of that parts of that conditioned self. But what happens, it gets replaced with other different levels of conditioned self, which you can call a mature conditioned self. And that's why I say it's not mature at all. There's no maturing from a baby illusion to a teenage illusion to a 20-year-old illusion. They're all illusions. There's no maturity in the illusion process. If you want to call true maturity, it's when all that illusion starts disappearing, or parts of it at least, and you're experiencing life in the absence. Then that's, you can say, is maturing, but not even really. That's a good word for it, because really we're mature already. We were born mature. We were born as life consciousness. We were born with no associations yet, to the greater extent. And then as language is learnt, you just build up more and more ideas for this conditioned self. But the main thing to this video is, it's not us. This is the process that goes on with the conditioned self. It's giving a judgment towards life, and particular triggers to particular judgments for different people. It varies. And then it's the conditioned self that's reacting to its own judgments that it made, and perceives reality as a disturbance when it's the disturbance, it is the disturbance, and it is our consciousness that's untouchable that's giving life to this associated character. So the conditioned self is judging, it is getting disturbed through its own judgments, and then it takes on new faces and tries to fix and repair itself, and tries to fix its disturbed self, endeavours to be positive, or maybe even destructive in some way, in its belief to fix things, to restore its sense of self in whatever way. And there's many infinite variations, but the basic pathway is pretty simple. It's basically all based on building upon, or deleting parts of itself and then replacing it with new parts. It's very ancient and old. It's not very complicated at all, because it's all based on consciousness identifying. That's it. If consciousness no longer identified with that conditioned self anymore, all its theatrical stories would disappear, because we're the one giving life to it. So, this video is important to sort of, as mentioned in other videos, you can use the conditioned self to wake yourself up. You can use the conditioned self to undo itself by observing it, standing back from a background, and feeling yourself as the awareness, the consciousness, the observer. And you can even say, just from my 15 years experience in self-inquiry, you do get to a bit of a situation where even that observer comes a bit of a conditioned self as well. But that's fine. I knew this from a long time ago, in the early years of self-inquiry, that I'd rather be a happy ego and a functional ego than one that's just a stimulus response animal ego. I'd rather be an ego that obsesses about self-inquiry and mindfulness and all this sort of stuff, and somewhat live a disturbed ego-based self in that realm, in that self-inquiry learning realm. But eventually, it does seem to condition the conditioned self to sort of be on its best behaviour a bit more, to be a bit more functionable. But yes, it's not enlightenment. You're still a conditioned self. But there's an opportunity when you go through this process of self-inquiry and self-awareness, that when you start disidentifying and not taking seriously anymore the conditioned self, there's a possibility that a big crack might appear, and spontaneous enlightenment may happen. As described in previous videos, my enlightenment only lasted for 1.5 days, and I know I don't really like to talk much about it, but there is other teachers. It doesn't seem to last long for other people as well. I know I haven't really mentioned it before in any of my videos, but I learned from Eckhart Tolle pretty much. Actually, I should go back earlier than that. Probably in my early 20s, I've always been a bit of a night owl, and used to watch Anthony Robbins commercials late at night. And I did that for about 5 years because my ego wasn't ready yet to purchase his videos. And then after about 5 or so years, I purchased his videos and I became an Anthony Robbins disciple for about 3 years. And that worked well, but it didn't seem to address the ego. It also did his what Anthony Robbins is good at is becoming aware of your negative self-limiting belief ego, and then replacing it with new positive ego. And even Anthony Robbins admits that it's a constant and never-ending development. It never ends, but you learn to like it because that's all it is. You're replacing positive ideas with negative ideas. The other way around. Negative ideas with positive ideas, but you're still a conditioned self. But like I said, just a few minutes ago, you become a more functionable ego, and a bit more, a lot more effective in life, and a little bit more control over how your experiences over life and how you interact with people. Things improve. And then I dated a woman that she was an Eckhart Tolle fan, and I just knew I had some very strong moments happening when I first met her. That I knew that and she even said it as well, that I probably need to let go of Anthony Robbins and get onto Eckhart Tolle stuff. And I did have a bit of a strong shift one day, and I made that decision. But yeah, in the first 3-4 years of Eckhart Tolle, I listened to Power of Now and A New Earth on audiobook CD. I burnt them on a DVD, and I listened to them in my van on my commutes to work every day and back, an hour each way. And I did that for about 7 years. And in the first 4 years, my ego seemed to get a little bit worse. It felt like it got more disturbed, and even but actually I should go back to even before that. In the first 12 months of Eckhart Tolle, my ego was so strongly disturbed that it looked at Eckhart Tolle as it continually made judgments about Eckhart Tolle, and so I was unable to actually even listen to his audiobook, or do any self-inquiry work. I was only able to listen to the audiobook only. So that's what I did for the first 1 year, as I used my never-ending constant chatter ego complaining about Eckhart Tolle as a meditation. So technically I was doing the self-inquiry work, but I hadn't actively taken part in it yet directly. And but that's just how it was. I wasn't naturally a person. I would say my ego wasn't naturally conditioned to take on Eckhart Tolle straight away. There was huge obstacles that was unstomachable to practice self-inquiry directly, but there was a readiness at least to just listen to it every day, and that's what I did. Hope the rain isn't too noisy. So yeah, and did that, and then so my ego was just, I don't know, wasn't too keen on Buddhism, how Eckhart Tolle quoted Buddhism and Jesus and religious things. But after that, many years later, there's no big deal. All that ego and judgment and resistance to all those religious things went away, and I'm able to look at religious things in a different way now. And then, probably in the first 4 years, I had a lot of transition. It even felt like my brain was cracking and making noises. There was new neuro pathways being wired, because I'd go to a swimming pool once a week during that time, and I'd float in warm water, and I could hear my brain cracking and physically clicking and making noises. And I was in a very disorientated state back then. I still had more of my friends then, and they were very supportive of me during the process, and they didn't understand what was going on. But I just remember it was a whole paradigm shift in the way life was. You can call it I went from the most common thinking realm of life, and then I transformed slowly, breaking away those conditioned self, and then life's perspective is changing with it as those structures are collapsing and fading away. In the first 12 months, after I started in self-inquiry, pretty much in the first week I had about 3 minor enlightenment experiences pretty much within the first 7 days. Probably happened after about 2 or 3 days practicing observing the chatter of my mind, that the consciousness began to wake up and see, wow, there's something else that I am besides this chatter. And that was totally unseen my entire life. Never had a glimpse of that ever. And it was through the process of listening to a power of now and a new earth that gives you the basic mechanics of the structure of ego, and you can say academically learning about the ego and how it operates. So it's a very simple book. Probably with the first 2 chapters, are not too useful, but of Power of Now. But after that, chapter 3 onwards goes into it. The very simple, basic psychology factors that go on within everyone. That's been going on since the start of time. And so the first week I had this experience, and there was a realization, wow, like there's this weight got lifted and the structure got observed and that structure disappeared. And then there was a realization, wow, I'm enlightened because I could feel this weight lifted. And then a few days later, the same thing happened. A even more judgmental, conditioned self was exposed and witnessed by my consciousness and seen as not it. And then that collapsed and disappeared, and a weight that it held disappeared as well. And a sense of aliveness came back to me in that process, all simultaneously. And then there was a sensation, wow, I'm enlightened now. And then by the 7th day it happened again, and I sort of came to a realization this process is probably going to happen a lot more, to enlightenment. But I did feel, I don't know when it was, so that was about 3 years ago, so it's probably after about 12 years, which is 3 years ago from today. So I think it's been started about 15 years ago, self-inquiry. And 3 years ago was that enlightenment experience, which I believe is complete and utter enlightenment. There's nothing more to it. There was no more identification anymore. There was complete silence. It was like, as I've described before, it felt like the pure, the normal beyond, the real normal, not the normal that we feel in our current lives now. It was the real normal. It was a normal that was incapable of being disturbed. As I said in previous videos, you could have been slapped in the face and spat at, and there's no reaction felt anymore because there was no one being affected anymore. And but yeah, with Eckhart Tolle, I did actually see him. Not sure. He went to the Hyatt Coolum Resort the first time he came to Australia, and it was like a 4-day retreat, and he spoke about 3 times a day. And probably after about the 3rd day, I wanted to sit up and close, front and center, so I waited at the front of the big venue that had 3,000 people there. So I sat up at about the 3rd row, and Eckhart did his talk with 3,000 people in the room at Hyatt Coolum Resort, which is now called the Clive Palmer or Palmer Resort. And he looked at me pretty much within the first minute or so of his talk, and I looked at him back, and I looked at him continuously, and he looked at me for 90 minutes non-stop. And my ego just was quiet. There was no chatter throughout the entire 90 minutes. It wasn't saying, oh, look how special I am. Eckhart Tolle's looking at me. And so I just looked at him back. There was no chatter. There was complete absence of egoic activity. And I looked at him back, and then at the end of the 90 minutes, as his talk was coming to an end, I did have the gate opening experience, as I've described in other videos. It was an enlightenment experience where the gate opened up, and there was this huge feeling of I don't know. Back then, it was like a huge feeling of pain, all the pain that was being brought up to the surface that I didn't know what was there, and it caused the body to cry. And Eckhart saw this, and he didn't even blink his eyes. It's like he knew it was going to happen. And so no, people in that state, they can. There's a lot more going on than what the average person. That's why I call it the real normal. The real normal, what our normal calls capable of doing miracles, is not miracles. There's a level of reality that our current reality calls miraculous, but it ain't miraculous. It's just a normal reality, because you're not a self anymore, and you're in touch with oneness and everything all around you, and the natural part of all that, not having a false self, brings about certain things in life that Eckhart doesn't really talk about. You might hear occasionally him mention some phenomena stuff, but he doesn't really mention. He doesn't want to scare the audience away. But I know he does. He has mentioned it occasionally. He said that before his book was written in Sedona, California, someone walked up to him in it was a psychic community, and one of the people walked up to him in the streets and said, "Good morning, Eckhart." And it doesn't seem too strange for someone to say that, but his name was not Eckhart at the time. It was, I think it was Eckhart Tolle or something. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And I think he said he had a dream as well, where he saw a 1-ton pallet of books with the power of now written on it, and it said Eckhart Tolle, and his name was not Eckhart at that time either. So there's some of the phenomena experience that happen, but you won't hear much of it. You can do research a bit on it, but even Eckhart, like I was going to say before, he hasn't. He doesn't really be too specific. His enlightenment experience that he had, where he gets sucked into a funnel, it's sort of similar to what I had. And he had a voice tell him resist nothing. My one wasn't sort of like that as much, but my one that happened 3 years ago was more a dream, and it just became fully apparent. My conditioned self was standing in front of me, and I was not it. And in the realization that I was not it, that 10,000 kilograms lifted in an instant. And then at lunchtime the next day, the conditioned self slowly, that 10,000 kilograms came back, and there's nothing I could do to stop it, and that's sort of how I am now. But with Eckhart Tolle, he sort of mentions his enlightenment experience probably, instead of lasting 1.5 days, probably lasted about 3 to 4 years. He's not specific. He does mention in The Power of Now that even these experiences come and go. And I'm sure even Mooji, his experience probably didn't even last. Who knows how long that lasted. So it seems full enlightenment, it doesn't seem to, probably because of the collective state of consciousness, people can't stay in that state for too long. There could be some people that are in that state, but I would say that you probably wouldn't even hang around with people anymore. That's what I felt. This whole world didn't matter anymore, and I don't mean that in a negative way whatsoever. It was just so peaceful. That peace of God that defies all understanding. The peace that people describe when they have a near-death experience. It's just immaculate level of peace, and it's so normal. And you realise that this whole world is a distraction. You don't need it anymore, and there's no more fear of death anymore, and you can go, and it's fine. So I feel if people are living in full enlightenment state, then they probably wouldn't hang around with people. You probably see some things on YouTube where people are doing these miraculous things, and they could be in that state. They're in that state, and they maybe be in that state for a long time. But it does seem apparent that a lot of spiritual teachers, they don't last too long in that state, but they become very insightful and peaceful for the rest of their life. And But Eckhart does describe that he can go back into that state if he's, probably by himself, and he focuses on the emptiness or something, or whatever he describes it as. He does go into that state. And Eckhart also did say that the animals came to his room at the Hyatt Resort. They, all these different animals like koalas walked up to his window, and but I'd like to see, maybe I've never really seen any of this in real life. I've heard of people telling me, a woman I dated once, her brother stopped eating, he became enlightened and didn't need food anymore. And then he returned back to eating because his vibration was so different from everyone else. People couldn't stand his vibration. So he wanted to hang around with those people, whoever they were, friends and family. So he went back to eating. So what we call miraculous or miracles, it's normal, because everything is governed by the conditioned self of what it thinks and it believes to be real. When that disappears, all the rules with it disappear. And then what is reality is self-evident. And that's why there is no such thing as miracles, really. The miracles are only through the perspective of the limited conditioned self. And that's why I do believe if there was a person named Jesus, then he did do all these certain things. But one thing I do question is that why did he, when his mates had some shop and he went into the shop and he broke all the shop apart, to me, there's no way that could happen. If you're in the enlightenment state, you would never, So even that's probably proof that even in Jesus, maybe his full enlightenment wasn't constant either. Maybe he couldn't. Who knows how many years his one lasted for? But to do that, I couldn't imagine in a million years in the enlightenment state smashing a shop up in anger. You're incapable of that anymore. You're just life consciousness, and the words that come through you, are very insightful, and there is probably, he did do so-called miracles, but as I said, they're not miracles. In a way, but the main gist of today's talk is that it's not us thinking, it's not us that's having opinions on the greater extent. It's not us definitely not feeling on the greater extent. It's our conditioned self feeling for its own judgments and interpretations. It's not our interpretations. Consciousness doesn't need interpretations. It's just life itself. It's one with life and one with what is, and it has no interpretation, and it has no sense of self anymore. It is just life. As Eckhart Tolle said, be comfortable becoming no thing, because God too is no thing. And that's enlightenment. It's when you return back to your original nature, it's just life itself. And we're approaching 33 and 33 seconds. So it's probably coming to the end now. But that's about it. Yeah, so I think eventually you will know, if you hear self-inquiry stuff and you recognize stuff inside yourself to what self-inquiry is pointing to, then it makes sense. But if your consciousness is identified a lot with being that conditioned self, then self-inquiry makes no sense. So that's why I say in the videos, anything I describe in the video can work and can't work depending on where your consciousness is at. Any tips and tricks I give to enlightenment can work and can't work depending on how they're used. If they're used in the service of your conditioned self, then they're going to increase the conditioned self and create more disturbances for it. And then you would think the advice or the direction or the pointer is not helpful. The pointers I give were helpful for me because my consciousness was ready and saw the illusion of my conditioned self in certain aspects, and that's why I generally prefer to use the conditioned self, to observe it rather than trying to look away from it. I look at it directly and transmute it and turn it into orgasmic, orgasmic, transmute it from its all that rigid energy that's trapped in it and releasing it, and it explodes and turns into a shower of euphoria. But that comes because there's already within me, there's a consciousness that's rooted, that feels like home, that I'm comfortable with. And when I use self-inquiry, there's no issues with occasionally, using the conditioned self and staring at it and observing it in such a manner that it burns up. But most times the conditioned self will run away very quickly. That's why when I give some tips and tricks to invite the conditioned self in for a cup of coffee, it won't show up. Generally, if it's used rightly, that's true. It will happen. It will not show up because you're completely awake and you're smiling and you're familiar with your root essence of who you are, and you're encouraging the illusion to come forward and have a coffee with you, and it can't do that. It doesn't like that. It only wants you to be asleep, and then it'll come in for a coffee and it'll smash up all the house while it's there. And it'll get you to believe that you're the one doing that, and you're the one being disturbed from that. And then it'll come in and try to fix itself from its disturbance, and participate in endeavours to heal itself and repair itself and strive to get away from its disturbed sense of self, when all along you're the one in the background feeding all of this, the untouchable you. The greatest question in the universe is who am I, but also am I touchable or untouchable? If anything points to you being a touchable character, then that's not true. It's only delaying your awakening, or in the same thing, it can actually enhance your awakening, because that's what you might need at the time, to believe yourself to be this touched self, until it becomes apparent that that's not true. So there's no such thing as right or wrong, really. Sometimes believing in illusions or part illusions are necessary. There's no right or wrong way, or fast or slow way. From the greater perspective, you might say it's a slower way, certain ways, to partly believe in an illusion, to undo an illusion. But that's what's necessary sometimes. So everyone's doing the best they can, and their consciousness can only do the best they can in where they are now, based on how much associations they have and what they are associated with. Just a quick meditation before I go. Just say your name and picture in your mind's eye what your name. So if I say Peter Demetrio, and I picture that image of that Peter Demetrio, of what it is today as this 44-year-old fat guy smoker that sits on the bed making YouTubes. But see that I am not that, and anything else associated with that. I am the consciousness that's giving life to any character, be it good or bad, positive or negative. I am the life giver to all these characters. I am the witness on the stage that witnesses the characters on the stage, and I'm sitting in the cinema chair eating popcorn. As I eat that popcorn, I'm untouchable, I see, because I am no thing, and God too is no thing. Thanks, everyone.